I want to move on to another sutta that illustrates another way that the Buddha talks about loving kindness, and you'll see that this fits quite well with some of the things we've already been talking about. And so, this is in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's the 31st discourse. The Majjhima Nikaya is the middle-length discourses. These tend to be much longer than the ones in the connected discourses, but there's no thematic structure to this collection. And in English, it's called the Shorter Discourse in Gosinga. So some of the sutta titles tell you something about the sutta. Like there's one called The Removal of Distracting Thoughts. It's like, oh, okay, I know what that's about. But a lot of them have titles like this that don't tell us very much. But the context of this, which tells of the Buddha meeting with three monks, is that previously, and it appears to have been coming from a situation where there was a dispute in the Sangha called the quarrel at Kosambi, another place in northern India and northeast India. And this, I find this story particularly, I just think it's a fun story. There were quite a few monks who living at Kosambi, and one of the things that we learn about the setting of the Buddhist teaching in his world is that as his community grew, some of the senior monks would start to lead groups of junior monks, so that the Buddha wasn't teaching directly all the time with particular people. That because it got to be so many, hundreds and hundreds of monks, that he would sort of give people, assign people roles, and it's interesting. So different of these senior monks would have different kind of specialties. So there were these two groups together, one of which was led by a senior monk who was very knowledgeable about the rules, all the precepts, because there were 227 rules that the monks had to live by. And so I'm not sure about the other leader, but we'll say that he was more of an expert on just meditation. It's not so important because the first one is the important one. So the meditation master went to the loo, went to the outhouse to do his business, and now, as you may know, in India, the role of toilet paper is taken by water, so that one uses water to accomplish the same purpose as we use toilet paper for. And so in this, I forget how they refer, the term they use for it. Anyway, he's in there, and there's a bucket, right, with water and a scoop, and the rule said that if you use the water in the bucket, you don't leave the bucket half empty. You take it out and you refill it. This monk, the senior monk, did not know that rule. And so the person who went in afterwards realized that he had broken this rule and went to the senior rule monk, said, this guy broke a rule. So the senior rule monk went to the meditation monk and said, you know, that you broke a rule. You didn't refill the bucket. Now, I know this is very esoteric in a certain way, but think of it in your own life. You know, if there's ever anything that someone does in your own household that we agree that we're going to not leave dirty dishes in the sink, right? And then you come in and there's dirty dishes in the sink, right? So, all right, put that aside. So the monk who had broken the rule says, I didn't know about the rule. I didn't realize that was a rule. So the rule monk says, well, then it's not a violation. Because if it's a violation, then there's a certain, you have to make amends for it or apologize to the community, or it depends on if it's the level of severity. For certain rules, you can be demoted, so that if you're a senior monk, you're not a senior monk anymore. Or if it's really a bad rule, or if it's a really bad breaking the rule, like having sex, for instance, then they just kick you out altogether. But this isn't a really serious rule, right? We call it a minor rule. But so he tells him it's not a violation because you didn't know. But of course, in the future, you'll know. And so each of these monks has a following of monks. And the word gets to the followers of the rule monk that this had happened, but they get it wrong, and they go to the followers of the meditation monk and say, your teacher broke a rule. And they're like, what? So they go to their teacher, and he says, no, the rule monk told me it wasn't a violation, so it wasn't a rule. So then they go back and tell the other monks, no, he didn't break a rule, you know, because your teacher told him it wasn't a violation. Oh, no, your teacher is lying. Lying? No, you're accusing our teacher of lying. So back and forth, back and forth. The quarrel begins. So, and somehow the senior teachers get involved, and you told me it wasn't a violation. And you know, there's this whole turmoil. So word gets to the Buddha, so the Buddha goes to visit them at Kosambi. He says, you know, what is going on? Like, you know that harmony in the Sangha is the most important thing. We can't be having these kind of quarrels. You need to let it go, drop it, you know, move on. So, you know, if it were us, probably if the Buddha came in here and said, you know, people, stop, we would probably, no, they didn't. They did not respond positively. They were like, you know, just butt out. We don't need your help. We've got this covered. The Buddha's like, okay. So there's this great phrase that shows up in many of the suttas where he says, now is the time for you to do as you see fit. In other words, shine on, as we would say. So the Buddha leaves. And then the next place he goes is to Gosinga, where we encounter these three monks. So that's the backstory to this sutta. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Nadika in the brick house. No idea what that is, but which is sort of odd, the Buddha living in a brick house. But anyway, don't know anything about it. Now, on that occasion, the Venerable Anuruddha, the Venerable Nandya, and the Venerable Kimbala were living at the park of the Gosinga Solitary Wood. So Anuruddha is a senior monk, and Anuruddha was apparently a cousin of the Buddha. The Buddha seems to have had a lot of cousins. They keep showing it. Some of them he gets along with, some not so much. Anuruddha is good. Anuruddha, though, we learn in other places that he was had a lot of powers. He developed some kind of the cities that's Siddhi. These are spiritual powers that derive from deep concentration. So he's a pretty, serious monk. Then, when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and went to the park of the Gusinga Sala tree wood. The park keeper saw the Blessed One coming in the distance and told him, "Do not enter this park, recluse. There are 3 clansmen here seeking their own good. Do not disturb them." So apparently, there's monks. They're like having a retreat in the woods, and there's a park keeper who protects and who's sort of looking out for them. It's kind of an interesting situation. Just imagining that, if you had like a park in Redwood City, where like 3 homeless guys went in there to meditate, and then there was somebody who took care of the park, and they kept people out so nobody would disturb these guys. Then the Venerable Anuruddha heard the park keeper speaking to the Blessed One and told him, "Friend park keeper, do not keep the Blessed One out. It is our teacher, the Blessed One who has come." Then the Venerable Anuruddha went to the Venerable Nandiya and the Venerable Kimbala, who were the younger monks, and said, "Come out, Venerable Sirs, come out. Our teacher, the Blessed One, has come." Then all 3 went to meet the Blessed One. One took his, this is a very typical description of what happens when monks meet with the Buddha. One took his bowl and outer robe. One prepared a seat, and one set out water for washing the feet. The Blessed One sat down on the seat made ready and washed his feet. Then the Venerable Ones paid homage to the Buddha and sat down at one side. So just, again, these little details. These guys are mostly walking around barefoot, right? And so whenever they come somewhere, and they come, they bring water to wash their feet. But unlike in the Bible, where the disciples wash Jesus' feet, here the Buddha washes his own feet. So for what it's worth, slight cultural difference, but same problem, right? Same problem. When you walk around barefoot, your feet get kind of dirty. So here's where the sutta starts to present actual teachings rather than the things that I just find intriguing culturally and historically intriguing. So the Buddha says, "I hope you are all keeping well, Anuruddha. I hope you are all comfortable. I hope you are not having any trouble getting alms food." In this whole dialogue, Anuruddha basically repeats everything back to the Buddha. We are keeping well, we are comfortable, we are not having any trouble getting alms food. So, trivial point, but to me, telling that here the Buddha is visiting these monks who are in a very serious meditation practice, but the first thing he wants to know is, are they getting fed? So he's looking out for their welfare. It's not just, are you enlightened? It's like, are you guys okay? Are you getting food? Because, they live on alms, on people giving them food each day. They're not allowed to keep food. They're not allowed to grow food. They depend on the villagers. That presumably there's a village nearby where they would go each morning and walk through and get alms, be given food, and the Buddha just wants to make sure, you're getting food. And then he says, and here's where we start to see the echoes of the quarrel at Kosambi. "I hope, Anuruddha, that you are all living in concord with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." So this sort of unusual phrase, blending like milk and water. It's not a common phrase that I've encountered before. Usually when we talk about people not blending, it's like oil and water, right? And so milk and water, we realize, those, you can stir them together. You pour some milk into your tea. And Anuruddha answers in the positive. Yes, we are living in concord and mutual appreciation without disputing. So the first half of the sutta, or the first section of it, we'll see that the Buddha keeps pressing these questions. And again, I think this is because he'd just come from this setting where the monks were really not getting along. And he wanted to see, okay, how are you getting along? And also, this then becomes a teaching that we have now that shows how we're supposed to get along with people. But Anuruddha, how do you live thus? Venerable Sir, as to that, I think thus. It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that I am living with such companions in the holy life. So the first thing he says, when asked about how they get along, is that he reflects on gratitude, that he has this situation. And it's, something that we can all forget very easily, if we're living in a setting with loved ones, or if we come to a Dharma center. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to I have what's called an aversive personality, so I kind of see the negative first, like people are annoying, or they're bothering me, or, why are they doing that? Why is that person breathing like that? Rather than, it is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that I am able to practice here with these people that share these values that I do. And then he goes on and he says, I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness toward these venerable ones, both openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness toward them, both openly and privately. I maintain mental acts of loving kindness toward them, both openly and privately. So, when I first discovered this sutta, I was planning to give a talk on loving kindness, and I went to the index in this collection, and I looked up loving kindness, and then I saw that there was a sub-note, or a subtopic, loving kindness in action. And that was why I went to this sutta. And so that's what is, really what this sutta is about, and why I bring it forward in this context of living kindness. That we can often characterize loving kindness, and it's presented in the Buddhist world somewhat as just a meditation. Just sit there and meditate and send love to people, and then get on with your day. Like you're done. But, that misses the point, right? This is meant to be more than just a thought. And for it to really have value, it's got to go beyond having a thought. So when he says, I maintain bodily act of loving kindness toward these venerable ones, both openly and privately. So he's doing things for them that they know he's doing, but he's also doing some things that they don't even know he's doing for them, right? Because we know that there's a difference between doing a generous act publicly and doing it anonymously, right? There's a different karmic consequence from that. When you do it publicly, there can be a little bit of ego that goes along with that and sort of wanting praise. But to just do it anonymously is to really let go of that. I need people to know that and to recognize it. So, it's interesting that this is pointed out in here. And so the other thing to understand about what this is talking about, he's bodily acts, verbal acts, mental acts. These are the three ways that we create karma. And so it goes back to the other sutta where it said good conduct of, bodily conduct, verbal conduct, mental conduct. So these are the three ways that we create karma. We don't just create karma by doing things. That's the most obvious thing. And socially, it's kind of the most praised, I suppose, or acknowledged. But according to Buddhist teachings, it is the mental karma. It's the mental act that is most important, because that's the starting point. famously, and I actually brought Gill's translation of the Dhammapada. The opening of the Dhammapada. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, so anything we do out of that mind, and suffering follows as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never-departing shadow. So everything starts with the mind. Even though we think of karma as being the external thing, and there's a famous turn that the Buddha does with this idea of karma, where he says that karma is intention. So it's the intention is the thought. It's the impulse behind the action. So that's what colors and creates the consequences. It's what really will infuse the karmic results of any action, is the intention behind it. So in any case, what we're seeing here is that Anuruddha is referring to the three ways that we create karma. I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness toward them, verbal acts of loving kindness, and mental acts of loving kindness. And then he says this other beautiful phrase, and this one, I think I had it on here. Yeah. I consider, so he says to himself, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? Then I set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do. We are different in body, venerable sir, but one in mind. So really powerful guiding principle, right? Why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? And it's not an absolute guideline for spiritual practice, because it's not always wise to put aside our own. We have to take care of ourselves as well as take care of others. But when I, as I said, when I first encountered this sutta, so I also was at the time the father of a toddler. So she's now 25, so that tells you how long ago it was that I encountered this sutta. When I read that line, I thought, this is what a parent does. We set aside what we wish to do. Like, I'd really like to go out to dinner or go to the movies, but I have to take care of my child, right? And do what this venerable one wishes to do, the little venerable ones, you know. You know, it's again, just a beautiful teaching. And then this final line, we are different in body, but one in mind. You know, great teaching to carry with us, and goes back to what the Buddha said to the Pasanati and Malika, that, you know, when you realize that there's no one more dear to you than yourself, and everyone realizes they're more dear to themselves, then we realize, oh, we all have that same quality of you know, wanting to protect ourselves, wanting to take care of ourselves, needing to take care of ourselves. We are different in body, but one in mind. So I just find that whole paragraph to be so rich and full of sort of guiding principles for living. And the other monks then agree with Anuruddha. The Buddha keeps going. He says, good, Anuruddha. I hope that you all abide ardent, diligent, ardent, and resolute. Surely, Venerable Sir, we abide diligent, ardent, and resolute. Now, this is a very important phrase, diligent, ardent, and resolute. But from what I have studied about this, and I think it was Bhikkhu Bodhi again, who's the translator of this collection, who mentions, because this stood out to me as well, but he mentions that this phrase, everywhere else he's seen it in the Pali Canon, is referring to meditation. And that it's very unusual for it to refer to just how people are getting along, how they're living together in the forest. So for what it's worth, because if you've ever studied the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta, this is one of the key phrases in there: diligent, ardent, and resolute, and refers to the quality of right effort in meditation. So the Buddha here seems to be applying it to their living in harmony here, blending like milk and water. And as I say, Anuruddha replies, yes, we are abiding, diligent, ardent, and resolute. But as with every other question the Buddha asks, he requires details. I want the receipts on this. But Anuruddha, how do you abide thus? Venerable Sir, as to that, whichever of us returns first from the village with the alms food, prepares the seats, sets out the water for drinking and for washing, and puts the refuse bucket in its place. Whichever of us returns last, eats any food left over if he wishes, otherwise he throws it away where there is no greenery, or drops it into water where there is no life. He puts away the seats and the water for drinking and for washing. He puts away the refuse bucket after washing, and he sweeps out the refectory. We're getting the details about their housekeeping. Why is this preserved in a 2,500-year-old sutta? Why do we need to find out about how they take care of their little campsite? And again, I think this points to how important these kind of things can be in a living situation, right? These can be the things that blow up in a household. You left the dirty dishes in the sink again. You didn't put the toilet seat down, right? I asked you to start the dishwasher. It's garbage day. Why didn't you take out the garbage? These are things, these are real things, right? It's trivial. And yet, to blend like milk and water, we need to do these things. And I love it because it again takes loving kindness away from these lofty realms, the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes. And there are suttas and there's, teachings where we find that, if you practice loving kindness and fulfill that in the deepest meditative states, you'll be reborn in these other realms, these heavenly realms, right? Well, great. Meanwhile, how are things going at home? Right? Are you blending like milk and water? And that's sila, right? That's the first part of the path. You're not going to get out there to that rebirth if you're not taking care of this foundation. And I'll say, some of the people here, a couple of you in any case know me from my other role as a person who works a lot with people in recovery. And I often bring these together in the question of recovery from addiction with the Dharma around this very question that what's beautiful about recovery in the addiction world is that we are learning to take care of ourselves and of others and of the world in very basic ways. And addicts have a lot of problems, but one of their problems is that they make a mess of their lives. It's not just that they're drinking and using or whatever their addiction is, but that they kind of go through life in creating this chaotic world around them. And recovery is very practical. It's really learning to show up and take responsibility for things and kind of be an adult, And one of the reasons I love working with people in recovery is because they've laid that foundation of sila when they come into the Dharma world. And then there are people who come into the Dharma world, and I was one of them because I started my Buddhist practice before I got sober. And I had these lofty ideas about going on retreats and being enlightened and having these bliss states, but my life was chaos. It was a mess. You know. I won't go into the details. Some of the details are in some of my books, so But it was only when I got sober and started to take care of those foundational things that my spiritual practice really blossomed. And it took years, that whole process. But that's what the Buddha is talking about. He's saying, you need to start at home. Start with the way you get along in your home, and then build out of it. Because what's interesting here in this sutta, and striking, and if you didn't understand this connection, so many of you I know this this phrase, sila, samadhi, panya. So this is how the Eightfold Path is broken up into these three sections. Sila is the behavioral aspect, morality, and it's the taking care of the house. It's the foundation of it. Samadhi is the meditation. It's the cultivation of the clarity, focus, mindfulness, concentration in meditation. Panya is the wisdom, the insight that arises out of that. So it's a process of development, a gradual training, as it's sometimes said. So if you didn't realize that, the next thing that shows up in the sutta would seem to be completely bizarre and out of place. So just after this description of how they take care of their campsite, and some of which I might go back over because some of it I think is also very telling, but the next thing the Buddha says is, Good, Anuruddha, but while you abide thus, diligent, ardent, and resolute, have you attained any superhuman state? A distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones, a comfortable abiding. So after all of this, the Buddha immediately asks, basically, have you attained enlightenment? Or some stage of enlightenment? And you think, well, what's that have to do with cleaning up the refuse? But it's because it's sila, samadhi, panya. The rest of the sutta is just all about these states, and it's it's lovely, it's great. It's several pages of it, and all of it, how it is that their attainment is, the gods have heard about their attainments, and they're all talking about it, and they're all excited about it, and all this stuff. But for me, it's this opening that's so moving, because it's so real, it's so human. It's what we all have to deal with. I hope we can all attain superhuman states, distinctions in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. I certainly hope so. But I'm pretty sure that we have to take care of this stuff first, and that's what it's going to build on. So, I love that sutta. Oh, I love sharing it and talking about it. So, yeah, I'll go back to one other line in here. When they're describing how they take care of their campsite, when he says, the person who's cleaning up throws it away where there is no greenery, or drops it into water where there is no life. So we can see here, right? They're very environmentally sensitive. They don't just throw the garbage into the plants, and they don't, if there's some fish swimming around, they don't throw garbage in there that might harm them or might pollute the water. So we can see that there's environmental sensitivity in the suttas. So, a few minutes before we take our lunch break, thoughts, questions, comments? Yeah.
As you were talking about the the three phases that start with sila, it seems as though that's how you build the momentum of karma and the causes and conditions that lead on the Eightfold Path. Is that the way you see it?
Yes. And it's important to remember that sila is not just behavioral. It's also mental. What Bhikkhu Bodhi calls mental purification. So, and I can get caught up, particularly because of my recovery orientation, to thinking about behavior as kind of the key thing. But again, so that to think of sila, we don't, even though we can lay it out in this order, sila, samadhi, panya is actually a web. The Eightfold Path is a web. It's not a chain. It's not that you start at one point and get to the end point. They're intermingled. Because we can see that, as I was talking about before, mindfulness needs to be there in order to have right intention. And right intention then is behind behavior. In the recovery world, we say right action leads to right thought, and which there's certain truth in that. But the critical thing, it's not enough to just act, look good, give away a lot of money, and seem to be have nice parties and everybody likes you. I often hear this thing, he's a really great guy. You always hear this on sports broadcasts when he's a really great guy. And I'm always like, are you sure? Like, what do you know about what goes on inside that person? And of course, behind the scenes. But the internal, so that the sila, samadhi, panya, there's a mental purification and a verbal and a behavioral purification, as in sila. And that depends, the reason that we do that is because we have right view, because we understand that suffering is caused by clinging. So the sila is influenced by right view, which is supposed to be panya. So it's not really the end of the path, right view, right? And then that right view triggers right intention. And all of it, but you've got to have mindfulness to know that what your intention is, and you've got to be mindful when you're speaking to create good. So you can see it's all just intertwined.
And you call it a web, but your body language reveals a kind of a spiral where there are kind of connections between the levels of the spiral as it moves.
Yeah, I say a web partly because I've heard Bhikkhu Bodhi use that term, so I bow to his wisdom and to his language. The only thing about because a spiral seems right too, but there is something more hierarchical about a spiral, because you're kind of like you're spiraling up or you're spiraling down, depending on where you're spiraling. So, and just in terms of an image, but yeah, it works that way too, because there isn't sort of a beginning or an end. It's got that element of spirality, if you will.
That's good.
Thank you.
We have a question on the chat.
Okay, good.
From Sarah. I very much appreciate this discussion, and I have really found that, quote, move a muscle, change an attitude, close quote, works. How does this relate to the teachings where attitude seems to come first?
I was trying to find the thing, and then I stopped listening to you. So I can't find it, so read it to me again.
Sent to me.
Sorry.
I very much appreciate from Sarah this discussion, and I have really found that, quote, move a muscle, change an attitude, close quote, works. How does this relate to the teachings where attitude seems to come first?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it goes to that same AA expression of right action leads to right thought. And so to put it in a little bit of context, when you're an addict, the first thing you need to do is stop doing what you're doing. And it's hard to like change your whole mind about like, oh, really? But just first thing, like stop it. And so that it's come to be this sort of accepted wisdom that, oh, it's that action comes, and then later on you'll figure it out, or you'll understand it better, or you'll change the way you're thinking. And so the move a muscle, change an attitude is I think saying the same thing, kind of like get going. And so that depicts something that's real, but the Buddhist understanding would be that before you can move a muscle, there has to be an intention. That you can't do anything without intention. Now, intention is quite often not seen or even acknowledged or known by the person who has that intention, right? We do all kinds of things unconsciously. But the mind, which is why it's better than saying a thought precedes it, it's the mind, as Gil translates the Dhammapada, the mind precedes the action. So somehow the mind, that impulse, there is an intention there even though you don't see it. So that's the Buddhist argument on that case. At the end of the day, it's hard. It's hard to see intention. And we deceive ourselves, right? I mean, this is the famous phrase, I don't know where it comes from, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I would say that's not accurate. The road to hell is paved with seemingly good intentions, or intentions that are claiming to be good. But the intention, the true intention, is always going to manifest in a karmic. You can kind of tell by the karmic consequence what the actual intention was.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the sutta and the story and the backdrop and the final closeout. So it started with a lot of quarrels. There were a lot of quarrels about the scoop and all that, filling up the water. And then the Buddha comes on the scene and he asks them what happened. And nothing of that quarrel actually persisted into the Anuruddha's response. Was there a punchline supposed to happen?
Anuruddha wasn't there.
Oh.
Yeah, this is a whole other group of people, right? It's like in Kosambi, where the quarrel was, there's all these monks. The Buddha leaves, takes a hike. We don't know how far, but he's always walking around, right? It could have been 20 miles, it could have been 50 miles. Probably a few days later. I mean, I'm just conjecturing because we don't, there's no historical record as far as I know about the timing of all this, but this is a different place. He's gone to Kosinga from Kosambi, so.
So the quarrel wasn't part of the sutta?
The quarrel what?
Wasn't part of the sutta?
No, it's a different sutta.
Oh, okay, I thought.
Yeah, that was my lead up.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's mostly covered in the Vinaya, which is the monk's rules. The Vinaya has all the stories behind all the rules, and I've never read it, When I talk to some of the monks today, they'll be like, "Oh, that's in the Vinaya," and I'm always like, "Where can I get a hold of that?" They're like, "Yeah, you don't want to see that." And I think it's pretty dense, but I don't know. It's in here somewhere. I'll see if I can find it during the lunch break. I believe it's in the Majjhima. So we probably should take lunch. My plan was to do 10 to 1 and then have 45 minutes to an hour for lunch, depending if people have brought food, and then we'll go from 2 to 5. Let's just take a moment and sit, and we can do our preparation for mindful eating. So, what I like to notice in preparing for mindful eating is how hungry I am. So notice if you are hungry or not. And if you sense that you're hungry, see if there's sort of a range of hunger that you feel. Then breathing with your hunger. Hunger is just another word for desire. A desire to eat, a desire for food. When we can learn to be less driven by desire, then we create less dukkha in our lives, less suffering. So see if you can breathe and bring calmness, a settled mind state, not one driven by craving, so that as you approach your meal, you do so with a balanced mind, with a mind not driven by craving. Meals are a time when we have the opportunity to feel or express gratitude for the food which we have. Where we can recognize interdependence, seeing how the food that we consume is brought to us, cultivated for us by others, how fruits and vegetables, other foods are dependent upon the sun, the rain, the earth. Seeing that humans and nature are all interdependent, that we are part of a vast web of interdependence. Finally, that we eat to sustain ourselves so that we can cultivate the qualities of wisdom, loving kindness, compassion. So, enjoy your mindful meal. Thank you.